In Moscow, Vladimir Putin has just addressed Russia for the so-called Day of Reunification, the annexation anniversary of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson. The speech is short, pious, and built on three themes: sacred history, national unity, inevitable victory in a righteous battle. It's also deeply defensive and, well, frankly, from my point of view, offensive. On the Kremlin's own site, the text celebrates millions who supposedly chose Russia and promises to rebuild what the war destroyed. The verbs are muscular, the reality is brittle. Now the optics. Putin chose pageantry over policy. He used the address to re-sanctify the war and to reassure nervous elites that momentum still exists. The Times notes that he paired the rhetoric with a large autumn conscription intake, the biggest since 2016, to signal resolve without announcing another mobilization. That tells you two things. Manpower remains a constraint, and the Kremlin knows a fresh mobilization risks protest flashpoints. Second, the fuel shock that is fraying patience across Russia, and most notably in Crimea. The pictures and the reports out of Sevastopol show long lines, rationing, stations closed. Reuters documented queues snaking through the city and a patchwork of restrictions across multiple regions. Within days, the government extended the gasoline export ban and slapped new limits on diesel exports through year-end, explicitly citing the squeeze. Petrol is leaking out of the system. This is not a normal seasonal blip. It is the cost of Ukraine's sustained strikes on refineries, depots and pipelines. Crimea is the regime's prestige project. When pumps run dry there, it punctures the myth of control. Moscow-installed authorities have now imposed hard caps, typically 30 litres per fill, and a local price freeze. Even Kremlin-friendly outlets describe rationing with unusual bluntness. It's rare to see a narrative crack open in the fortress of occupation media, yet it is happening. Third, the strategic cause of the shock. Ukrainian long-range drones have imposed persistent downtime on Russian refining capacity. By late August, Reuters' own tally put offline capacity at record highs, with earlier waves disrupting about 17% of national product and rollout, and follow-on attacks in September hit additional plants from Kirishi in the northwest to targets deep in the interior. Oil that cannot be refined must be exported, crude, or shut in, neither of which solves petrol at the pump in Belgorod or Simferopol, hence bans and rationing, hence anger. So, where does this leave Putin tonight? His message is backward-looking. His speech mythologizes ancestral lands, promises of rebuilding. It doesn't explain why 3 years on Russia is still unable to guarantee basic fuel supply on the annexed peninsula that is supposed to symbolize his triumph. His state is firefighting. Export curbs are emergency macro levers that concede scarcity and sacrifice budget revenue that once subsidized cheap domestic fuel. Policy that once projected strength now broadcasts constraint. And his elite coalition is under strain. Shoigu's removal in 2024, the parachuting in of Andrei Belousov, a civilian economist, told you that the war machine needed an accountant. The subsequent anti-graft purges of senior defence figures underline the rot in the cash squeeze. An army that's arresting its quartermasters is not an army at ease. Now, to the street. Will Russians risk protest? This is not 2022. People have learned that the tripwires are there. What we see instead are micro-gatherings that arise around scarcity, queues, local telegram complaints, municipal grumbling, the small brave clusters that chant before the police arrive. Crimea is particularly combustible because the population includes both annexation loyalists who feel betrayed by shortages and quietly resentful Ukrainians who never accepted the change. When the governor says the situation will improve in 2 days for AL95 and 2 weeks for AL92, and it doesn't, queues become forums, forums become networks, networks become protests. That's the path the Kremlin fears. The rationing orders acknowledge that fear. Let me put the military economy in one sentence. Ukraine has found a pressure point that translates into civilian irritation, military friction, and fiscal pain at the same time. Every refinery outage means longer logistical tails to the front. Every export curbs means thinner subsidies for drivers. Every cue is a video clip. Every clip is a quiet act of anti-myth. The righteous battle begins to look like a costly grind that cannot keep the lights on in Belgorod or the pumps flowing in Sevastopol. So what might happen next? Well, I think rationing will spread before it eases. The export bans will help at the margin, but they cannot conjure refined product if physical capacity is damaged or down for repairs. Expect more regional limits, especially for canisters and priority fueling for state vehicles. The Kremlin doubles down on symbolism, more mini-speeches, more medals, more restored schools on TV. The logic is to drown material discontent in patriotic sound. Tonight's speech is Exhibit A. And expect additional arrests, discipline, tightening or reshuffles around the defence-industrial complex to claw back funds, to show activity. That is what the Belousov appointment was for. It has its own risks, of course. Frightened elites hoard cash and information. And Ukraine will keep up the tempo. If Kyiv sustains a rolling campaign that holds 15 to 25% of refining offline until the winter, Russia will juggle between frontline needs and civilian calm, and that juggling act creates the slack in which protest murmurs grow. And Crimea? Well, tonight is the pressure cooker. The peninsula has 500,000 people directly experiencing the war's costs every time they drive. Rationing is a daily referendum on competence. If the queues persist into November, the regime will be forced either to divert more fuel at the expense of other regions or to risk local anger in its showcase territory. Neither is attractive. That is why you are hearing triumph in the presidential speech and contrition from regional officials. It is the sound of a government talking past itself. A final judgment. Putin spoke to project inevitability. What came through was contingency. The state can still coerce, but its ability to deliver is eroding in visible ways that ordinary Russians can touch or cannot because the nozzle is dry. That is how legitimacy frays in systems that claim total control, not with one giant march on Red Square, but with 1,000 quiet scenes at forecourts and shop counters, and with the bitter joke that the homeland is mighty, yet the petrol is missing.